Andy, thanks for taking the time again, mate. Elsa, thanks for joining me. Mick, thanks for joining me. Theo Webster, finally got you here. Chris Gibson, thanks for coming in. Thanks for joining me. Tony Howard, thanks for taking the time to come out and see us. Really appreciate you being here. Another thing that came up, and it's kind of in the same vein, was actually the leading challenge that people foresee, which is naturally inflation. Obviously, it's on the news a lot at the moment. The cost of living crisis is still incredibly topical, and even in because obviously we're recruiting a bit at the moment as well, and the salary expectations that you see in now versus for the same role 2-3 years ago, it's astronomically higher. So what impacts are you seeing there in the purchasing arena?
Yeah, no, I fully understand. I get it. It's all we talk about, in the news. If you go onto, I don't know, like the BBC News website, there's a whole section for the cost of living crisis. So in terms of my role and sort of what we actively do, I mentioned previously about benchmarking to make sure we remain competitive, giving ourselves choices when we go into different manufacturing facilities to make sure we remain competitive, keeping a close eye on commodities, raw material, exchange rate, freight, and again, keeping really good, close relationships with each of those, what do you call them, sort of leaders within that or experts within that sort of field of industry. In that respect. So we've got really good long-standing relationships with these people, and very open and honest as well, which is really good.
So it's I think with challenges of this nature, what more can we do than, like you say, keep ourselves as close to the action as possible and keep our customers informed. That's the number one priority. Look, this is coming, this is happening. This is what we're expecting to see. And I mean, fundamentally, the focus for us, I hope you agree, is to put a quality product out at a competitive price.
Yeah,
that's the goal.
Absolutely.
And I certainly think you're doing a pretty good job of that at the moment, mate.
Thank you, Jake.
Despite the hefty levels of stock we've got out there in the warehouse.
I don't know what you're talking about.
The last big response on this one was actually matched the freight prices at 24%. That's digital transformation. Now, there's as you know, because we've discussed this recently around our product data, but the digitalization of information in the industry is something that really ramped up from 2020, naturally, with the rise of e-commerce and people going online. But we're now starting to get into a load of other areas with this, and it's really exciting. It's obviously a lot of work, but it's really, really exciting. I mean, you've now got, I know it's been going on for a few years, but it seems more prevalent now, the rise of BIM.
Yes.
People have got VR headsets on and they're walking around the buildings just in a studio. So it's great stuff. And we are getting ourselves in a position that we're ready for when for the people that want it and need it now, and also for when the rest of the industry catches up. But what are your plans in purchasing there? Because I know you've got some pretty big plans.
I'm not sure if you've heard me mention this, but spreadsheets are like the devil, to be honest. There's a spreadsheet for this, there's a spreadsheet for that.
Yeah. It's all in different folders, it's all over the place.
You have to go to here to get that. So we're in the process of, or starting the process of migrating across from our current Sage system to Microsoft Dynamics.
Yes.
With that will bring a huge amount of benefit, automation, that digitalization side of things is going to be
cleaner processes, more clarity for staff. Much easier.
All in a single location, nice clean data.
Nice clean data.
When you're working with an MRP system, you need to make sure your parameters and your data is super clean. Otherwise, it's going to give you poor messages, and you're going to potentially order too little, not too much, or for the wrong time. So clean data is just absolutely paramount. But yeah, we're going in the right direction. But yeah, we need to keep up with the times really.
Yeah. What was our overall pick accuracy in 2022?
Overall pick accuracy was 99.7% last year.
Okay. And how are we tracking for 2023?
Currently, we are on 99.8, so we have slightly increased from last year.
Nice. Okay. So how do we... Because the 99.9 extra digit percent has been something that we've been recording for quite a while now.
Yeah.
And I always remember a stat that we had, and it was something like 99.99% pick accuracy from 2012 to 2017, 18 and on.
Mm-hmm.
How do we ensure that happens? Like, what have you done between last year and the start of the first half of this year?
So what we've put in place is, every person will have a pick sheet where they go and pick an order, and we have one person to pick the order, one person to check the order, and one to pack the order. So that's actually like 3 different people, set of eyes looking at the order.
Okay.
So that's our main thing, which does seem to be working, because in the past, if you've got the same person checking and packing it, that's when things have been going out. We also, when I speak with sales, so they'll always make us aware of the errors that have gone out. We'll look at if there's like repetitive things that are happening. For instance, we have similar product stock in the grounds, or they've got similar item codes, and we will get them moved, just because when you're in a rush, it's these little things that your eyes just slip. And also what we do is, when we have goods coming in, because that's so important to get that away correctly, when that's put away into the ground lokes and into the stock in the air, then we get it post-checked to make sure that stock is actually correct to what we've planned on the system.
Okay.
And that will stop things going into the ground loke incorrectly.
Right, okay. Well, I know you were a bit nervous before we started filming this.
Yeah.
Just
a little bit.
Yeah. So I'm just going to throw a bit of a spanner in the works and ask a question that I had for later on, and I'm going to bring it in now.
Stop it.
Just to keep you on your toes. Because the pick accuracy is driven in large part by the layout of the warehouse. Now, we've got to be careful here, because we don't want to give too many trade secrets away. But how does that layout and that constant review of the layout play into feed into the picking accuracy that goes out to the customer?
So where we've got it laid out in the warehouse, we have everything in different aisles, like A, B, C, D. And we have like our A, Bs, what are close to the dispatch area. They're our most popular products. The idea of that is to get them into the dispatch area as quick as possible, so we can get more lines picked and pushed through the door that day. And then we have items, as you go further on, we have a back wall, and then there are items where we only sell them like 4 times a year.
Right. Oh.
We also have really popular items where they need a full ground picking location, and they'll also have a permanent level 3, what we call it. And the idea behind that is to stop the guys having to keep going into the main office to find another location for the same product in the air. Instead, if they know if that's a permanent level 3, they can just drop it in to keep the workflow going.
Okay.
But then every 6 months, what I do is I'll look at the average monthly demand, because a lot changes all the time. And then you might find stuff that no longer needs that level 3, or stuff on the back mall might be becoming more popular and it needs a ground location. So that's pretty much what I try to do to keep it more efficient out there.
Okay. When they're sourcing conduit tube, what are the really important things they need to know about?
Okay, well, the first thing we need to assess is that the conduit tube meets the British standard. Now, on Metpro tube, the British standard for reference is BSEN 61386-1 plus A1 2019. I won't repeat that again.
Okay.
But basically, the product needs to be stamped to that. If it's not stamped to that, stay away. But as far as Metpro's product goes, that standard brings in numerous tests in regards to strength, corrosion resistance, fire resistance, all those kind of things within that standard. And the Metpro product is tested towards that. So, for instance, on this particular product here, you can see that we stamp our product with our brand name, and that is part of the standard requirement, that there is an identifiable brand on it. We also put the full British standard number, and then you'll see 4 digits beyond that. And like I mentioned, there's 13 different categories within the standard. These 4 numbers here denote the first 4 and the level of achievement that our product achieved within those first 4 categories. Right. So one of them is compression and so on. So and these 4 numbers are 5557, and that is the highest level in each of those 4 categories that you can achieve within the standard. So we're pretty confident in our own product.
Okay.
But then if you follow that on, you've got a clear indication of what the product is. So in this instance, this is class 4, which is the highest corrosion resistance, hot dip galvanized, people would call it. And that's marked on there. And then we've got a tracing number as well. Okay. So for every batch we produce, we can take it right back to core production. And that's very important from a traceability point of view as well. And then we put on the end there the size of the tube, but most people who handle this kind of product would know straight away what that is. But so that's the real key feature for us, that the product meets the standard, and the product should show it to prove it.
Okay. Well, there's a couple of things that you've said there that I wanted to pick up on. So the first thing is, you said if tube that's being sourced hasn't got this marking, or effectively exactly the same information with probably a different brand, you said stay away. Why?
Because you've got no traceability, you've got no clear indication of what it is produced to then. Because for it to, as part of the standard, the product needs to be stamped, showing the standard. That is a clear category within the standard.
And those components of the marking have to be on there to
they do
conform.
So even for instance, these 4 digits here that I talked about, the 5557, that's an inclusion that came in the last 18 months, 2 years, on an appendix has been added to the standard. And what that really does, it just gives a clear indication of, okay, the product's passed the tests, but to what level? Mm-hmm. And these 4 digits can tell you what category level you passed at. So that's the inclusion of that. Again, is part of the standard now, so you should be looking for that on your lengths of channel.
Certainly in my time here, there's been a few instances of when end users have bent tube, and you hear of tube lengths splitting or cracking. How can that be avoided? Do we have anything in place to prevent that?
We certainly insist on a minimum wall thickness. So you start with 20 and 25 mil. Our product's minimum wall thickness 1.37. Right. In reality, our product is averaging anywhere between 1.4 and 1.45 on every batch that comes in, and they're tested. Okay. So that guarantees a certain amount of strength. Within the standard, there are all the different categories, with including in that is impact, compression, all these strength tests that really product would fail if the wall thickness is too light on it. So, and the other thing as well is when you're putting a thread on the product, if the wall thickness is too thin, your thread will cut through, and you'll start to see visible indications of the thread inside the tube, or even cutting through the tube and exposing the inside. Those are the kind of things that could happen on a product that is too thin. Okay. But 1.37 on a 20 and 25 mil. Obviously, with the larger sizes, 32 mil upwards, the wall thickness increases.
Before we get into the first question, I came across a quote last week from Arch Daily, which I thought, that's really, really appropriate. Yeah. So I wanted to start with that and then see where the conversation takes us. So it says, if we compare the state of car manufacturing a few decades ago and how it is now, it's clear how much the automotive industry has evolved. In the field of construction, however, the reality is different. Many processes remain virtually unchanged, with the use of inefficient materials and techniques and an extremely slow adoption of new technology. In fact, in many contexts, it's still highly artisanal, relying on extensive use of raw materials and labour. Innovation in construction is driven by a spirit of exploration, experimentation, and continuous search for improvement, and fosters a mindset of creativity, openness to change, and willingness to take risks. Often this involves applying new technologies, approaches, and perspectives to improve efficiency, effectiveness, sustainability, user experience, and overall performance. But it can also be seen in the more ingenious and efficient use of existing resources. In essence, it's about coming up with new ideas, challenging the status quo, and making meaningful contributions that drive progress and lead to positive transformations across a range of domains. How would you respond to that as a contractor?
It's a lot in there, isn't
Yeah, it's a bit chunky. I'm glad I got through it without stuttering.
Do you know what? Because you told me you were going to drop that in. I've not heard it myself. And I think it's true. Like you say, there's been huge innovation in like EV and things like that. But the construction industry, we are quite hesitant to accept new products, even though like quite a lot of your products, they are essentially the same products, but just developed to improve, like I say, time saving or money saving, whatever. But we're just so hesitant to take up on it.
Why? Why do you think it is? Because I know we were talking before we started recording, and the one that came up was roller tray.
Yeah.
And we were saying that one's been harder for people to accept or adopt over Conlock and Rapid Sale.
And I think part of the reason is if you see the price of roller tray, but you don't necessarily know enough about it.
Yeah.
You look at the bottom line and you go, okay, it's more expensive. But when you actually put it side by side with all the ancillary bits you need with tray and the equivalent length and everything else, it's actually probably exactly the same price, I would have said.
Well, I mean, when you factor in based on the exercises that we've done, which are available on our website for anybody wondering, we've, as you say, factored in the cost of the traditional materials versus the innovation.
Yeah.
And then when you start putting in what's the cost of even an apprentice?
And
how long does it take so take Conlock, for example, what's the cost to install one box or per spout?
Yeah.
And then how does that compare to the innovation? And then over time you save, I mean, that's why we could say 75% labour savings. And
yeah, definitely. I think the trouble is a lot of people, they don't see that saving in labour because they're just looking at that figure when they're costing a job. They look at that and they don't necessarily adjust to suit. Because if you did a huge commercial project and you were floor installation using roller tray, and you could save yourself potentially 2 weeks of labour over 6 months, say.
Yeah.
Say that was £20,000 worth of labour. Well, if you reduced your price by £10,000, you're more competitive and you're going to increase your profits by £10,000. I think, there's a lot of, because obviously it's difficult for you because you're trying to make sure you're competitive as well, price-wise.
Yeah, it's certainly a balance.
But you're trying to give that better customer service, the better quality product and everything else. It's difficult. And then people like myself, I look for that. I would sooner I'd happily spend more for a better quality product, whereas a lot of companies not necessarily would do that.
Okay, well, people sole traders who operate at a similar level to you.
Yeah.
Do you think that you're seeing that mindset shift in a positive way or in more of a negative way? I don't know how much insight you've got into this, but
I don't know, a bit of both maybe, because the great thing about more younger people coming into the industry is I think, are more incited to use products like yours.
Right.
Instagram plays a big part, certainly for me and for younger people. You learn a lot about products that you wouldn't necessarily know about, and like I say, wholesalers aren't actually pushing it out as much as perhaps you would necessarily like.
Well, no, I mean
they shouldn't have to. I suppose that's perhaps not necessarily their job, but it's But I think there's a lot of people out there who are still willing just to use cheap, nasty rubbish. Like I priced a job recently, it was domestic barn conversion, and I was £10,000 more than another company. And the guy came back to me. He wanted me to do the job because he's seen our stuff online, quality of things like that, and he's like, "Can you do anything?" And I was like, "Not £10,000, I can't."
Yeah,
not a chance.
Serious.
Don't get me wrong. It was a huge building, huge barn conversion.
Yeah,
not a cheap project by any means, and he wanted quite high spec.
Right,
but £10,000, and I'd guarantee at least 60% of that just comes down to products that are being used.
Staying in that vein, the biggest criticism I would argue that we get, and is predominantly related to Conlock, which is the fast fix steel conduit system, is you're removing the skill from the job. Now, I appreciate that because with Conlock you don't have to thread your conduit tube, and you've got your ribbon deburring.
You're still having to bend your pipe.
Yeah,
which is where I would say the skill is in conduit work. It all comes down to your bending. That's how you make a job look really good.
Yeah,
but the Conlock, because a lot of companies, particularly bigger companies, they still thread manually with stock and dies.
Yeah.
Even though they've got all these great threaders out there, which save so much time, ridiculous amounts of time. I bought a threader for a job and we saved weeks and weeks of time. But so again, but your Conlock product sort of accommodates that, removes that need for that. Allen key grub screw, I think it is.
Yeah, a little
isn't it?
grub
Just
screw.
to, you know,
Nip it up.
Maintain your earth continuity still.
Yeah.
So I would disagree that it's removing the skill, because I don't think the threading is any skilled part of that.
Okay.
If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So yeah, but I know why people say things like that though. Particularly with like going back to roller tray again, but we talked about this before. Now, so we were saying it removes the skill of manufacturing bends and things. But what you're finding now is a lot of commercial projects, they actually specify you have to use prefabricated bends. So it's happening anyway.
Yeah.
You know, so
It just looks more traditional.
it does look more traditional.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, it just comes down to people being a bit set in their ways, and we need to get them out. And
Yeah. Just on the on the labour, because people say, you know, you're removing the skill from the job, and okay, but when you've got a labour shortage, which is what we're being told, and you can save, stick with Conlock, you've got 75% labour saving, and then you see a stat like this, which I've pulled from the Office of National Statistics, was that the industry has lost more than 1/3 of EU-born workers since 2017.
Yeah.
And there's an industry training board that estimates that to meet 2027's demand, we'll need an extra 225,000 workers.
That's mad. Because I think in the UK currently, I had a look at this before I came up here, there's something like 230,000 employed electricians in the UK and about 350,000 in all sectors.
Yeah.
So like you said, if we need to increase by X amount to be able to accommodate for it, but if we're using innovative products like Conlock or Roller Tray, you're actually almost, not completely, you know, removing the need for that extra labour, but you're certainly reducing it because of the time saving. So
yeah, exactly. So we're trying to keep the wheels in motion.
Yeah.
And answer another challenge, which I don't know how much better that's going to get.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or worse.
Yeah.
Well, again, that's something else you were talking about, and how, I mean, I know we touched on social media and circling us back to the brand. What do you see as the big changes in that respect since COVID?
I think there's a number of things. We were talking sort of offline earlier about COVID, and it seems many years ago, but I think there's been some huge fundamental changes with the industry. I wasn't working for the first 6 months of COVID. Watching as a bit of a voyeur on LinkedIn and that of people getting furloughed and horrible times. I think a number of things. I think people's personal buying habits have changed massively.
Right.
I can't believe I'm going to admit this, but prior to COVID, I'd never used Amazon.
Still shocks me.
So I use it a lot now, but I've never used it. Now, people's personal habits change. So when they're procuring then from a business point of view, the digital offer, the web offer becomes a huge part of that multi-channel
Vital
offer. So the multi-channel offer, I think people are expecting that as a standard. The investment in that and having the correct data. The quality data becomes critical to it, the visibility becomes critical to it, and the service becomes critical. So I think that has changed people's behaviours on the other side of COVID. I think it's accelerated it. I think it was happening anyway. Digitalisation was going to happen.
It was.
I think it's accelerated it.
Yeah.
I think on a downside, we've lost a lot of experience and expertise out of the industry. So people have either decided to take early retirement or have retired because they were due to. But when you look at some of the senior people within the industry that were key players, there's a lot of expertise gone out of the business.
Right.
And that leads us on to, with brands, investing in younger people and developing younger people. I mean, if there's one thing for the industry that I personally feel is probably the most important thing, it's encouraging younger people into the business. Yeah. A more diverse set of people as well. I mean, we are still quite a male-dominated industry.
We are.
So I think there needs to be efforts, and I know there are from a lot of companies. But I think once we attract people, because it's not the sexiest of industry, people don't sit at school knowing what's...
I've got posters of conduit tube on my wall at home.
With your hair and everything like that, perhaps it's slightly different. But once we get people in, we have to invest in those people. We have to invest in young people. And it's the retention of staff then. And I think that will help define a brand. So as we said, if you can encourage people to join and we can retain them and develop them and train them, I think if they understand the values of that brand, if they understand what the brand is really trying to do, what the whole strategy is, then you will retain them and they'll see the benefits of that. And you know, we need new, fresh skill sets, without a doubt.
What's the level of true buy-in you've got from staff into the brand, and what's got them to really adopt it?
I think obviously working with my whole previous career in a more corporate environment, CF's still a family business. And the legacy there of the original founder and the family is huge. And people, there is a different feeling coming into a business that is a family business, and it's exactly the same as yourselves. And I think people buy into working for the family, supporting the family, because the family has looked after its staff as the development, and you know, there's reward mechanisms in place, and not just the financial side of it. There's a softer sort of side to working for that type of business as well, and there's, you know, it has to be flexibility in that work-life balance these days. And I think that's more relevant than ever.
It really is.
And I think the staff really do buy into that, to the family feel. And you know, every 2 years there's a conference for all the staff, etc. On the back of CEF Live, and the family there are very honest. And I think probably one of the things that's really surprised me is the honesty that CEF shares with both its staff but also supply chain.
Right.
So when we do supplier events, which we do once a year, the senior management team will share information that probably other businesses may feel would be confidential. And I think that honesty and openness is a real trait of CEF, and yeah, that will continue.
I mean, this is again what we were talking about before we started recording. This is what the entire purpose. Obviously, there's for us as a business, it gives us exposure and gives us, you know, some content that we can put out onto social media and the like. But fundamentally, the reason we decided to do this was to have these kind of conversations and be more open and honest. And I mean, I've said it before. If we had a customer who hated us for whatever reason, hopefully there's none out there, or a contract who was fed up about products, we've got no issue of having them on here and recording it and having, you know, that dialogue with them and trying to understand, well, where have we gone wrong and how can we fix it. So I do think the journeys are very similar, actually. But with the customers, how have they bought into the brand, and how have they taken it on?
That's been an interesting journey. So I can only speak for sort of the larger customers that we've targeted and been involved with, and the support has been amazing. But it wasn't just a case of turning up and expecting the business. Far from it. There was the perception of CEF, which you quite rightly articulated earlier on. So we needed to demonstrate exactly the capabilities we've got. And again, there were a certain number of branches dealing with certain sectors that have the skill set. So it's really understanding what the customer really needs, not just a blue sky PowerPoint presentation, but really understanding what the customer needs, and then making sure we've got the right locations, because 395 locations can't do everything for everybody. So, you know, we've put skill sets into certain locations around larger contractors, especially around rail, etc., where we've got bespoke skill sets in place. And I think all we asked for was a chance. Once you get that first chance, the high level of service that has traditionally been known in the business then really just kick in. And this is going to sound perhaps a little bit soft and a bit soppy, but the branches that we really worked with in the early days, they didn't think they would ever deal with some of these customers.
Right.
And when they were given the opportunity, they absolutely grabbed it and loved it to death, as they still do. And that's allowed us to develop our relationships with some of the larger national customers. That's now led on to us developing what we call customer fulfillment centres, which are not branches, they're large professional logistics warehouses that we can actually store bespoke products for projects, for bespoke markets, and the branches can utilise that space and utilise that skill set of the logistics there to service the customers. So we've launched 2 in London, in Dartford and Chesham, and the plan then is to roll those out across the country. So that's an exciting part of the jigsaw as well, for suppliers as well, because that allows us to stock product in bulk, larger products or perhaps more ugly type linear products.
I know that I know Rexella are going through upskilling of the networks. I've seen Tech Talk promotions on LinkedIn. But you just a minute ago you said that the expectations are more clearly understood in other regions. So how have they done that?
Well, I think again it's about, you have to get past that trust bit.
Right.
It is the bit that says, I'm a contractor, so let's keep it non-controversial. So I'm a contractor A, and I want more from the wholesaler. To get more from the wholesaler, I have to be prepared to open up more about my business, the opportunities I have, the opportunities I see, and the need for my chosen wholesaler, let's call them B, that we don't do in the UK. We want to have a conversation, but it's kind of restricted. It's very much, well, I'll tell you something, but I won't tell you everything.
Right.
And globally, there's more willingness, there's more openness around, what potential jobs you've got, what you're quoting for, rather than quoting for it and then expecting the wholesaler suddenly miraculously to have, enough stock for 5 years. Well, we don't. We're no different as a business from any other business at the moment. Is if we don't know what's coming down the pipe, the chances are we won't be prepared to help you with it. So with other countries, there seems a more willingness to be more forward-looking.
Right.
All the contractors who watch this will probably hate me, but we still invariably find a situation where everything's last minute. Yeah. I've won this job, I've got this big job, I need X, Y, Z by Friday. And that's just not practical these days. It's more challenging than that. So I think it still comes back to, and I'm already in my head sounding like a broken record. It's about trust. Yeah. It's about trust and it's about openness. And are we really prepared as an industry to embrace that? Or do we just want to talk about it?
Okay. Do you think there's an element of that then that's, a couple of elements of it. So again, just before we started recording, you were given an example scenario of, I'll say justifying a decision. I don't think that's quite as extreme as that, but and you gave the quote that was essentially, I don't know why we do things that way, but we just do. Mm-hmm. So do you think we're stuck, and do you think there's an element of that classic stiff upper lip Britishness?
Are we stuck? I think as an industry, I mean, again, this is my throwaway cliche line that will probably come back to haunt me, right, and several people after me. I have always described the electrical industry as proud to be in the 20th century. Right. Yeah. Okay. The fact that we're in the 21st century seems to escape most of us. Mm-hmm. Whether that's driven by a stiff upper lip, I think, politics aside, so this isn't related to political parties, by the way, but I think the UK as a whole is a very conservative country. Mm-hmm. It's traditionalist. Yeah. It's proud of its values. It's proud of its heritage, or it certainly was. When I was growing up. And as a result of that, we tend to look at things as the way they are and the way they should be. So, for example, so much of it is still British standard, even when we were part of the European Union. Yeah. Yeah. There was still a reluctance to have the foreign stuff. Yeah. So the standards still had to stay British standards, although we were part of the European Union. The change in cable colours, core colours, from the traditional British colours to the European harmonised was like a nightmare. Why
Right.
would we change?
Yeah.
Yeah. We had an environment where we needed to run with both types, old and new, because people were reticent to go to brown, blue, green, yellow, having been red, black, and green.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think there's an element of traditionalist in it, and I think it's probably a very traditionalist industry. I mean, one of your guests, an old friend of mine, Chris Gibson, did allude to the fact that it's a very male-dominated industry still today.
Yeah.
And whilst men are running it, they tend to be on the traditionalist side.
Right.
He also talked about how a lot of the old guard or the old people, and include me in that comment, by the way, are leaving the industry.
Yeah.
You can view that one or two ways. You could view that in a negative sense, that you're losing all of this experience. But you can also view it from a positive way, that you are bringing younger people into the industry, and younger people are taking up more and more senior positions. And by younger people, generally, I mean younger than me. So I don't necessarily mean teenagers or people in their early 20s.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, they are people with a different viewpoint and perhaps a different undertaking. They may understand the industry that we managed to operate all these years. They may want to replicate it. They may want to change it considerably. We'll come on to digitalization and its impact on the business. But yeah, is it a traditional stiff upper lip British? I think there's a degree. There has to be. You cannot look on a global scale and say the UK is an exception and not imply that it's character driven.
Yeah.
It's culturally driven. So we're good at something. Why change it? Why risk it? So yes, I think some of it is you'll need a cultural change. You won't get that in the country because the country is traditionalist by nature.
Yeah.
The industry is probably behind other industries within this country. So you can't blame everything on the culture of the country and the stiff upper lip. It's driven by the industry that we're in, and that reluctance to innovate or change dramatically, or where we do have to change, to model it on what we did.
Yeah.
So we might have systems that are different from years ago. We probably, like most wholesalers, conduct independent surveys with contractors. Like, how well do we perform? How good is this? And list the important factors. And 95% of the time, price is not the number one. It's not listed as the number. Service is listed as the number one. Stock availability is listed. Price comes 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Translate that to day-to-day business. There's no correlation.
No.
Price drives everything. And again, it comes back to, are we kidding ourselves that we are more brand conscious than we really are? It's, for me, it's all linked into the same thing. It's honesty. Let's have an honest conversation. If we don't want a brand, let's not have a brand.
Yeah.
But let's not purport when we get asked that, oh yeah, brand counts, when actually, well, no, it doesn't.
Yeah.
I've got this quotation for £10,000 worth of 20mm conduit galvanised, and you're too expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, but whose is it?
Yeah.
What is it? Where does it come from? I'm only speaking personally, but within the last month, I think I've seen a dozen major project quotations go through. Very few of them are brand specific, and most of them are price sensitive.
Yeah.
So I think, maybe it's a bit cynical to say that we're we are moving towards brand. I think when we talk brand, I think there are certain aspects of brands that are becoming more important to people depending upon where they sit within the industry. Mm-hmm. So I think on major projects, large scale developments, yes, there is a demand for quality. There is a demand for standards, but it still doesn't detract from the fact that they still want the lowest dollar for that project.
Yeah.
So again, it's about, are we kidding ourselves? Are we kidding ourselves that we're doing one thing when we're actually doing something else? Maybe, as an industry, we're not prescriptive enough. Maybe when we talk about brand and brand loyalty, we don't actually describe what that means. We don't fully explain to people why this costs 100 and this one costs 75.
Yeah.
But often we don't get the opportunity to it.
Right.
We can't necessarily educate every person in every branch to have that debate.
Yeah.
And in a lot of cases, when we have that debate, we still end up with the comment, yeah, nice debate, but you're too expensive.
Yeah.
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 So I think it's back to the overall thing of where the industry sees itself in the UK versus where it sees itself in other countries. I still don't think we place the industry at the right level.
Right.
And I think that's one of the fundamental differences for other countries and their success. We place it in the UK at a certain level, and we don't treat ourselves the way that we should. We don't give ourselves the credit that we do.
Yeah.
We kind of, it's electrical wholesaling, or it's manufacturing, as if it is somehow less than scientific research, or working in the World Wide Web, or developing new iPhones, or that. It's a critical part of the infrastructure of the UK.
It's the backbone of the country.
Yeah. So maybe part of solving our problems going forward is to put it at a level that it should be. That doesn't mean everybody in it has to attain that level, but it means this is the level, this is the standard that the contractor expects from his wholesaler. This is the standard. This is the standard that the wholesaler expects from the supplier or the manufacturer. And put it at a level maybe that is higher than we are able to do today.
Yeah.
Because it should be something we attain over time, not something that was in easy reach, because otherwise it's not really stretching us beyond what we do today.
Yeah. I mean, when in terms of Metpro's brand, it's something that we're trying to cultivate. I think we've set out our stall pretty well.
Yeah.
And we try to be informative all the time. I mean, conversations like this, very open and honest for everybody, to anybody who's watching, to get a, this is unedited. It's unscripted. It's not manicured.
I think they can tell that.
Yeah. And that's on purpose, because we want to invite people in and see what we're trying to do. However, it's a very good point that fundamentally we can do as much as we want to. We're blue in the face. If the market at the end user level isn't making the demands further down the supply chain, then we have to operate within those demands. Otherwise, we'll go out of business.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's often a perception, really, that some of us control the markets more than we do. End users, architects, specifiers, they often leave specifications so wide open that people switch spec. Yeah. People, but we haven't got this, we've got that. But there's not enough due diligence in whether what you're actually being offered is the same product, the same quality product. We're often accused of being too expensive. Yeah. Part of that reason is, okay, but we stand by every product we sell you. Yeah. every product, every supplier that we deal with has gone through a degree of due diligence and is constantly reviewed. Now, reviewing doesn't mean that we always romp up on site to wander around and see whether you're still adhering to environmental policies or ethical policies, but it does mean that we constantly review the product. We have access to our own laboratory in Paris. We can send any product that we stock or sell to the lab and get it tested to make sure that it actually does conform with what the manufacturer says it does. Because we're not technically competent ourselves. If we receive a delivery, yes, we can tell if it's really bad, but technically, we have to go by what we're being told. So I think that there is an element of we have to understand the markets better. We have to understand who the influencers are. We have to appreciate quality more. And I also think we have to be less afraid of identifying people who are not conforming. There seems to be a distinct reluctance to criticise. Now, I'm not necessarily advocating that we become more American.
And grab the pitchforks.
And grab and produce what I call anti-adverts. Where we say, well, this supplier by name buys, or his product is inferior to our product. I'm not suggesting that. What I am suggesting is when we know for a fact that a product sold in the UK market, installed in the UK market in compliance with the regulation, fails because it isn't any of those, we never say anything. It's very quiet. It's everybody kind of sweeps it under the carpet moment. That everyone's happy to talk about it, but nobody's actually exposing it.
Which is incredible when you think about, I mean, obviously some products aren't necessarily life-threatening, but when you're talking about load-bearing products, steel channel, even the conduit tube, even clips going into the trunking we've got here, and if there's a fire, and making sure they hot, if those products aren't to a standard, there's a risk, and I would argue a vastly increased risk, that you could potentially kill somebody or cause somebody to struggle in escaping a building, for example, which is what happened with some firefighters in London, hence the Amendment 3 of BS 7671. And if manufacturers are putting products out into the market and people are buying them because, well, it was 5p cheaper, then we are potentially putting lives at risk.
Well, I think we underestimate the integrity of some of the products that we supply. So 41 by 41 channel. Okay. If that's all you ask for, 41 by 41 channel, there's no control over the quality of what you'll get, because any cable management system, any cable management product, you've got all kinds of specifications that you need to consider. The quality of the material, the integrity of the material, is it the right depth? Is it the right millimeter? What's the metal?
Exactly.
I've seen, and no doubt many people have seen, product that you can twist in your hand because the metal's so thin. So I do think we underestimate it. So channel, yes, but channel's load bearing. What's hanging off the channel. And so I do think that, certain areas, we kind of accept the fact that if fire alarm panels don't work, there's a threat to life. But actually, if you look at an awful lot of the product we sell that we don't perceive to be a threat actually is a threat.
Exactly.
Even down to simple things like screws. We're screwing stuff to a wall or a ceiling with a screw that is inferior in quality but 20p cheaper. You see an awful lot of that. We don't allow that. We don't permit that. I alluded to it earlier. Yeah, I find myself these days having to justify the price of brass screws because people can buy them much cheaper. But when you look at the product and you test the product, the content, the lead content, the nickel content of the screw is completely different. Yeah, you can screw it in the wall. Yes, you can walk away from it. But as long as we accept a system where product can be installed, somebody can walk away from it, and it falls down in 2 years' time, but they're not bothered anymore.